I met up with an old college buddy for drinks last week, and he looked just absolutely drained, dark circles, kind of a jittery energy, but he insisted he was happier than ever.
The classic denial.
Totally. He's preparing to propose to his girlfriend of 2 years, so he pulls out his phone to show me the ring, and it was massive. I mean, easily 3 months of his salary. Then he starts scrolling through this whole itinerary for a perfect proposal trip to the Amalfi Coast he's putting on credit.
On credit, wow.
And he was practically vibrating with anxiety, telling me how he's been grinding to meet her standards. He listed it all out like it was a resume. He pays for the apartment. He handles all the dates. He suppresses his own stress to be her rock when she's moody.
The performance phase?
Exactly. And he looked at me with this desperate hope in his eyes and said, I just need to nail this proposal. Once we're married, I can finally stop the chase, relax, and just lead my family like a traditional man.
Oh, that sentence. That's the core of the problem right there.
It just hung in the air. And honestly, it made my blood run cold. Here's a guy who spent 2 years begging, bending, and buying his way into her good graces, acting completely submissive to win her over.
Right.
Yet he genuinely believed that the moment she said, I do, she would suddenly flip a switch and start looking up to him as an authority figure. The disconnect was terrifying. He thinks the wedding is the finish line where he gets to be the king.
When it's really just the start of the actual relationship.
He doesn't realize that by training her to see him as a provider of services, not a man of purpose, he hasn't built a throne, he's dug a trap. He's expecting submission from a woman he taught to expect performance. And when that curtain closes on the wedding day, he's going to find out that you can't buy a woman's respect with the same currency you used to buy her attention.
That tragic narrative, which you just described so perfectly, it's being replayed across modern courtship constantly. And it's exactly what we're here to analyze today.
It feels anecdotal, but it's not.
Not at all. That underlying tension, the psychological, the sociological, the economic disconnect between these high-performance demands of modern dating and the resulting instability in the modern marriage. It's far from anecdotal. It is measurable. You can see it in the data.
That's right. And that's the mission of this deep dive. We want to trace that terrifying disconnect, not just in theory, but using the hard data. We're going to look at how the very tactics used to win a partner often completely undermine the foundations you need for a lasting, successful marriage.
We have to. We're going to get into the psychological biases that drive dating decisions, the data on these radically shifting gender roles, and the stark financial and legal realities that are weighing for couples who are operating under these unsustainable expectations.
So where do we start? It has to be at the beginning, right? The courtship itself.
It has to be. We have to begin where every relationship begins. The initial selection and the courtship process. We're calling this first section the courtship contract, performance versus evaluation, or as we put it, the eternal audition.
The eternal audition. I like that.
Because this phase, this is what sets up the expectations that either make or more often break the marriage down the line.
Okay, so culturally, we're obsessed with selectivity. We talk about finding the one, holding out for a soulmate, using dating apps to filter for perfection.
Like the checklist.
Yeah, the checklist. And all of this suggests we're constantly evaluating and rejecting potential partners who don't meet our exacting specific standards.
Yeah.
But is that what actually happens when humans date?
The research suggests it's pretty much the opposite. What social science actually identifies is a psychological mechanism called the progression bias.
Progression bias.
It's this inherent tendency in humans toward, let's call them pro-relationship decisions. So decisions that favor initiating, advancing, and maintaining a relationship, rather than decisions that would result in rejection or, just foregoing a romantic opportunity altogether.
So moving forward is just the path of least resistance.
That's a great way to put it. It means moving forward often feels psychologically much, much easier than hitting the brakes.
That really runs counter to the common narrative, doesn't it? Especially now in the era of what feels like endless digital options. We assume that endless choice means we're all ruthless and choosy.
You'd think so. But there are a couple of really strong drivers behind this bias. One is deeply evolutionary. I mean, for most of human history, partners were scarce.
Right. You couldn't just swipe for another one.
Exactly. So if you rejected let's say a minimally acceptable partner, the cost of searching for a better one could literally mean long-term reproductive failure. It was a huge risk. This led to evolutionary pressures that favored very low selectivity.
So better to lock someone down than to risk ending up with no one.
Precisely. Psychologists talk about this using something called error management theory. In mate selection, the cost of a type I error, so rejecting a suitable mate, was historically much, much higher than a type 2 error, which is accepting a flawed mate.
A false positive was better than a false negative.
The false positive was much better. The evolutionary drive is to secure a partner first, and then you worry about the refinement later.
So we're neurologically primed for relationship inertia. We initiate not because they are perfect, but because stopping actually requires more psychological effort than continuing.
That's the foundation. And then in modern Western context, we add these powerful social pressures on top of it. There is a pervasive, almost unchallenged ideology that life inside a committed partnership is inherently more stable, more successful, or more complete than life outside of one.
The stigma of being single.
A huge stigma, especially long-term. Fears of singlehood drive people toward what researchers call a fast and frugal approach to mate choice. They seek to satisfice.
Satisfice, not satisfy.
Exactly. To satisfice with a minimally acceptable partner rather than spend endless resources trying to maximize for a perfect one. It's about finding someone who is just good enough to get the process started.
Okay, so if that's true, it must mean people are actually quite broad in their initial dating acceptance. The data has to show that, right?
It does. The data on selectivity is surprisingly low, and it really reinforces this idea. You can look at speed dating studies, for instance, where participants have a very clear structure to evaluate many options very quickly.
A perfect laboratory for this.
It really is. In one large study of over 10,000 speed daters, participants on average said yes to 40% of their dating options. 40%.
Yeah, it's way higher than I would have thought.
It's very high. Women averaged about 34%, and men, true to form, were even less selective. They agreed to 49% of their options, almost half.
Half of the people they met.
Which suggests a powerful bias toward just saying yes to keep the possibility alive, rather than actively filtering and saying no.
What I find so fascinating here is that even when people have these strong stated preferences, the checklist they tell their friends they need in a partner, those preferences seem to crumble pretty quickly when a real person is sitting in front of them.
They absolutely do. Stated romantic preferences are actually poor predictors of actual desire for a specific date. If someone has a list of non-negotiable standards, they will often overlook major flaws or clear incompatibilities simply to secure a partner and avoid that psychological cost of rejection.
It's the inertia again.
It's pure inertia. The decision to move in together, for instance, is a huge one. But research shows it's often not a conscious, deliberate choice. More of a sliding into commitment, because at that point, stopping the progression feels much, much harder than continuing it. The progression bias means that once that inertia takes hold, the relationship often just keeps moving forward until something catastrophic forces it to stop.
Okay, so we have a pretty low barrier for entry because of this progression bias. But within that broad net that people cast, there's still a powerful, very specific selection filter at work, especially for women.
Yes.
And that brings us to hypergamy.
Hypergamy. It's a term from sociology and evolutionary psychology, and it refers to the practice of a person dating or marrying a spouse of a higher social status than themselves.
And that status is usually measured by things like income, education, professional success.
Exactly. The classic markers of status.
And what's really remarkable about this mechanism is its consistency. It's not just some niche Western phenomenon, is it?
Not at all. It is globally consistent. Studies of mate selection across dozens of countries find these very clear, very persistent gender differences in what people prioritize. While both genders care about physical appearance, men consistently prioritize women who are younger and attractive, while women consistently prioritize partners who are rich, well-educated, and critically ambitious.
That focus on economic and professional status, it really seems to be the central pillar for female selection.
It is the defining feature. In one of the most extensive cross-cultural studies ever done, we're talking 10,000 people across 37 cultures, women consistently rated good financial prospect higher in a potential mate than men did.
In every single culture.
Without exception. In every single culture they studied. And what's more, ambition and industriousness were rated higher by women in 29 of those 37 samples. So this isn't just about the money he has right now. It's about the perceived potential for long-term provision and status accumulation.
Okay, but here's the paradox that always gets me. If women now hold the majority of advanced degrees in many Western nations and are achieving high levels of financial success themselves, shouldn't that preference for a higher-earning partner start to fade away?
Logically, you'd think so.
I mean, aren't they severely limiting their dating pool by adhering to what seems like an old standard?
That is the essential paradox of modern dating. Yes, they absolutely are limiting their pool. The tendency for women to marry men with higher incomes still persists, even when they themselves are very high earners. Studies show that a woman's increased earning potential does not automatically eliminate her preference for a provider who exceeds her financial status.
So it's not just about need anymore.
It suggests the selection mechanism is less about pure economic necessity and more about these enduring identity norms and expectations regarding what constitutes a high-status male partner. They want a man who can provide more than they can, regardless of how high their own income is.
So when you combine the two things we've talked about, the progression bias, which is the inertia to just keep dating someone who's good enough, and hypergamy, this high bar for financial status, you get the unstable scenario we started with, the performance contract.
That's the critical collision. The fundamental psychological problem in modern heterosexual dating is that the man who is desperate to meet that hypergamous bar adopts an unsustainable audition role.
The eternal audition.
He must chase, he must buy, he must beg, he must constantly demonstrate his value, while the woman comfortably occupies the role of the constant evaluator or, the prize.
I just think of the sheer financial cost of this. He's funding the lifestyle, the trips, the big ring, suppressing his own emotional needs to be her rock. It's all just capital being invested in the performance.
And the consequence of that is that the man sets the tone. He establishes that she is the prize and he is the performer, which creates a dynamic of servitude. He is essentially proving his capacity for subservience to secure the hypergamous win.
He's paying a very high entry fee to get the high-status partner.
And that creates a relationship built on transaction, not on mutual respect.
So what happens when the ring is finally on her finger and real life hits? Mortgages, kids, stress. The performance inevitably has to stop because it's financially and emotionally exhausting.
The post-wedding disappointment is inevitable. The man hits what he thinks is the finish line and expects to finally relax, only to find out the game wasn't over. When the performance stops, for any number of reasons, burnout being a big one, the woman feels the initial contract was broken.
The deal has changed.
The deal has changed. The promise to always make you feel special was based on a lie, the lie of perpetual high-octane courtship. She bought the fantasy, and now she feels entitled to an exit plan.
And that leads right back to the terrifying disconnect in the story of my friend, the role reversal. He expects to lead the family like a traditional man after spending 2 years training her to see him as an obedient performer.
That is the core conflict that completely undermines mutual respect. He taught her to expect deference, not direction. If he established the entire relationship on the premise that she is the constant evaluator and he is the supplicant, why would she have any reason to suddenly shift to a submissive or even an equally respectful position just because a piece of paper was signed?
She wouldn't.
If he taught her that she sits on the throne, she will naturally expect to rule. The currency he used to buy her attention cannot purchase her respect.
So we've got a relationship that's built on this completely unsustainable contract, and now it's operating in a volatile, changing environment. We have to talk about the structure of marriage itself. What is a husband and a wife in the modern era? The blueprint has changed so dramatically.
The change is.
Yeah.
It's massive. We have to remember that traditional marriage was built on very clear complementary gender roles. The man's roles involved financial authority and responsibility as the primary breadwinner. The woman's roles centered on caregiving, home production, and emotional support. These roles provided stability through specialization.
Right, everyone knew their job. But the disruption wasn't philosophical at first. It was economic, wasn't it? The massive influx of women into the labor market just fundamentally changed the whole equation.
Exactly. By 2004, you had nearly 60% of women in the U.S. workforce, and in many developed nations, women's educational attainment surged past men's. So if both partners are earning substantial incomes, the historical justification for the male's final authority, his financial dominion, it just erodes entirely.
And the attitudes followed the economic reality, right? Even among men.
They did, which indicates a real willingness to adapt, at least initially. By the late 1990s, the majority of husbands surveyed expressed the belief that spouses should share breadwinning responsibilities. And crucially, they also acknowledged that men should increase their share of housework and childcare when their wives were employed.
So there was a recognition that things had to change.
A clear sociological acknowledgement that the traditional contract was outdated in a dual-earner world.
But did this shift in attitude actually translate into greater equality in domestic labor? Because that's a common point of friction.
The division of labor started shifting, but it often remained pretty unequal. Studies back in 1986 noted that even women who were employed full-time still performed the bulk of routine housework and childcare. This suggests the mental and physical load often remain heavier for the wife.
Interesting.
But what's also interesting is that these same studies noted that African American and Latino husbands reported performing more housework than white husbands, which suggests that cultural or contextual factors really influence this domestic role sharing alongside the purely economic factors.
And this movement away from the old patriarchal norms, it also translated into who holds the authority over domestic decisions, right? Who decides where the money goes, where you go on vacation?
The authority structure shifted decisively. The mid-1950s ideal was clear male final authority. By 2008, surveys show that 43% of couples reported that the woman makes decisions in more areas than the man.
43%. Wow.
And conversely, only 26% of couples reported that the man makes more decisions, with the rest sharing it jointly. So this shows the domestic power structure is not merely becoming egalitarian. In many cases, it's actually tilting toward female authority, driven by her economic independence and these changing social norms.
This brings us to what feels like the core identity conflict today, what you call the paradox of selective traditionalism. It seems like couples are trying to fuse two completely incompatible systems.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
What I observe is this intense tension where women desire the rewards of traditional masculinity, the reliable provider, the chivalrous protector, while at the same time retaining all the autonomy and independence promised by contemporary feminism. They want the benefits of both worlds without the compromises of either.
And that tension, it generates these deep behavioral inconsistencies that just exhaust both partners. Consider the emotional realm for a second. A woman may demand emotional vulnerability, urging her partner to share his stress.
Right, open up to me.
But the moment he genuinely expresses a need or a vulnerability, he is often perceived as weak or not being a rock. Her emotions are valid and need to be supported. His are a burden that he should man up and carry internally.
That has to create incredible cognitive dissonance for men who are trying to navigate these expectations. You're penalized for being emotionally closed off, but then you're penalized again for being authentically vulnerable. We need to just pause and recognize how exhausting that framework is.
It creates a no-win scenario.
Yeah.
It really does. He is still expected to shoulder the traditional responsibilities, like dealing with a crisis, a physical threat, or handling heavy financial risks. But if he tries to assume the other half of that traditional contract to lead or to exert decision-making authority over the relationship or finances, he is instantly deemed controlling or patriarchal.
So he must protect, but he cannot lead.
Exactly.
Right.
And the financial double standard that emerges from this arrangement, that seems particularly corrosive to mutual respect.
This is the big one.
It is the most contentious element, despite women's substantial earnings. And the data shows this even when the wife is a very high earner. There is a pervasive expectation that the man must fund the shared lifestyle.
Paying for dates, vacations.
The mortgage, the overall status signaling of the couple. The man's income is used for performance and for shared expenses. Her income is often reserved for her personal security, her retirement savings, or what is, cynically referred to as her escape plan.
So his money is collective, our money, and hers is individual, my money. That sounds like a significant vulnerability for the man who's trying to uphold that provider role.
It creates a severe imbalance where the perceived sacrifice is entirely one-sided. Think about it. If the relationship succeeds, both of them benefit from his investment in the shared lifestyle. If it fails, he has zero return on his investment and she has a sequestered nest egg. This structure directly contributes to that feeling of financial betrayal when the marriage dissolves, which we're going to get into.
And this conflict over identity and control it manifests powerfully in the economic data, doesn't it? Particularly concerning relative household income.
It does. The persistence of these traditional identity expectations is clearest when we look at what some researchers call the gender cliff.
The gender cliff. Okay, what does the data show about couples and this 50% income threshold?
The aversion is palpable and it's structural. When you analyze the distribution of a wife's relative household income, there is a sharp, distinct drop immediately after the 50% threshold. It's like couples are hitting a wall.
So they're actively avoiding it.
It seems so. Either consciously or through a series of micro-decisions about labor supply, couples appear to structure their earnings to avoid crossing that line where the wife becomes the primary provider. This is often seen as an attempt to mitigate the identity threat perceived by the husband and maybe even by the wife.
So what happens when that identity norm is violated? When the cliff is crossed and the wife does earn more, what are the consequences for the marriage itself?
The stability and satisfaction erode significantly. When the wife earns more than the husband, so her relative income exceeds 0.5, she is statistically less happy with the marriage.
She is less happy.
She is. She is also more likely to report that the marriage is in trouble, and critically, more likely to have discussed separation in the past year. The implication is crystal clear. Even if she is financially successful, she is less satisfied with the marital relationship when she financially outperforms her husband.
And this deviation from the traditional gender role structure, it significantly increases the likelihood of divorce, right?
Yes, dramatically so. Departing from the traditional gender role, particularly when the wife is the primary provider, significantly increases the likelihood of divorce by approximately 50% in the samples that were studied.
50%, that's a staggering number.
It is, and it demonstrates the powerful, if often unspoken, stabilizing force of traditional income roles.
So if this dynamic of the wife out-earning the husband is so destabilizing, how does this affect the entire marriage market? Does it just suppress the desire to marry at all? I mean, since successful women face a shrinking pool of even more successful men.
It certainly influences the aggregate decision to marry. When the likelihood that a randomly chosen woman in a marriage market earns more than a randomly chosen man increases, the overall marriage rate declines.
So fewer people get married overall.
Exactly. This is a crucial finding. It suggests that the dynamics of income equality influence who chooses to marry in the first place. If the social norm dictates that the man must earn more, and that becomes statistically difficult, then many highly educated, high-earning women, and the men they could potentially marry, they just opt out of marriage entirely rather than confront the instability of that inverted income dynamic.
We've laid out the psychological traps of the courtship and the sociological tensions within the marriage. Now, we have to look at the legal and financial hammer that often falls when these marriages fail. For many men, the legal system transforms the relationship from what was a partnership into a significant financial liability.
And that perceived betrayal of the provider contract is where we see immense vulnerability, especially for the high earner, in a scenario that's characterized by specialization.
Let's get into that. What is the financial specialization issue?
Let's detail it. The high earner, who is often the man, dedicates his income to shared illiquid assets, the mortgage, the cars, the family lifestyle, the kids' education. This expenditure is visible, it's taxable, it's tied up.
Right, you can't just cash out the house tomorrow.
Not at all. Meanwhile, the lower earner, often the wife, uses her income to purchase personal security. She's saving her income separately, she's investing in liquid assets, or she's simply not contributing to the large shared debt-financed assets.
That perfectly describes the scenario of the exit plan and this sort of unspoken ledger. The high earner pays for the family home, and in doing so, he inadvertently subsidizes the lower earner's escape fund by allowing her to preserve her liquid wealth while he takes on all the illiquid debt.
And the disillusionment comes when the marriage ends, because the legal framework often fails to recognize or reward the high earner's investment in that shared lifestyle. Instead, the law focuses heavily on compensating the relative need post-divorce and who has custody of the children.
So it's not about who paid for what.
Not really. The wife often walks away with shared assets like the family home and receives significant maintenance payments while retaining her separate savings. Savings which, in effect, were made possible by the husband covering all the shared expenses during the marriage.
That legal mechanism seems to almost incentivize the woman to save her income while incentivizing the man to spend his on the shared life.
Yeah, it absolutely reinforces that double standard. And this perceived systematic gender bias in financial outcomes and in custody matters has spurred some powerful, organized responses.
Right. Tell us more about the father's rights movement.
The fathers' rights movement in the U.S. and in other nations exists specifically to protest these perceived biases in family courts. They argue that concerning child custody, access, and financial mandates, the system disproportionately concentrates risk on the male provider.
And what are they pushing for?
They actively seek reform for issues they term the alimony racket, where they protest lengthy or permanent maintenance payments that seem disconnected from any actual rehabilitative need. And they also fight issues like paternity fraud, where men are financially mandated to support children that are not biologically theirs. They're seeking shared parenting mandates and fairer financial outcomes, pushing back against the feeling that the state views men primarily as disposable financial providers.
Let's delve into the economic models of these maintenance payments, alimony, and child support. On the one hand, they exist to provide what's called consumption insurance, right? Especially if one spouse specialized in home production during the marriage. But this goal creates a very, very tricky policy trade-off.
The trade-off is profound. It's about balancing that consumption insurance against maintaining labor supply incentives for both of the divorced parties. If the payments are too generous or too responsive to current income, they can create significant disincentives to work in the formal economy.
And how does the data prove these distorted incentives? Is it theoretical or can we see it?
Oh, you can see it. Empirical studies clearly document that increasing child support or alimony causes both divorced women and men to reduce their market work hours.
Both of them.
Both of them. For women, increased maintenance payments incentivize a substitution effect.
Yeah.
They substitute away from market work toward home production or leisure. Why endure the cost and stress of formal employment if the payments are covering your consumption needs?
And for men, the disincentive is essentially just a tax on their income.
Exactly. Every dollar the man earns over a certain threshold often leads to a mandated increase in his payments. This reduces his overall incentive to work more because a larger portion of his higher earnings is immediately transferred away. This creates a situation where both parties reduce their market labor supply in response to the transfer payments, which ultimately lowers overall societal productivity.
I find the concept of marital specialization fascinating here, that the very anticipation of divorce payments actually shapes behavior during the marriage.
This is a critical structural effect. The potential for receiving substantial maintenance payments upon divorce acts as a form of insurance. And this insurance encourages married couples to specialize in traditional roles.
How so?
Well, if the wife anticipates future insurance payments, she may shift toward home production rather than investing heavily in her own career accumulation because she's anticipating that future financial safety net. This can be counterproductive if the marriage endures and she seeks to re-enter the labor force later with diminished skills.
And if we're comparing child support versus alimony, are they equally efficient tools for providing this consumption insurance?
They are not. The economic research makes a very clear distinction here. Increasing child support moderately generally leads to smoother consumption paths around divorce, assuming the payments are not too heavily tied to post-divorce income. However, increasing alimony comes with substantial labor supply disincentives and, shockingly, often fails to provide robust consumption insurance.
Wait, hold on. If alimony is designed to help the woman, why would it fail or even amplify her consumption drop? That's completely counterintuitive.
It is, but it happens because the policies often tie alimony payments directly to the income gap between the ex-spouses. This mechanism generates extreme disincentives for the woman to increase her own market work and for the man to increase his earnings. The distortion is so severe that it can lead to inefficient outcomes.
It just gums up the whole system.
It reduces the total post-divorce income pool available, and in some cases, it can cause a greater drop in consumption for the woman than might have occurred otherwise, while simultaneously causing a significant consumption drop for the man paying it. The legal system, in its effort to provide fairness, often creates profound economic inefficiency.
So we've established that women's economic opportunities influence divorce rates, but the decision to dissolve a marriage is clearly also a calculated financial one. What drives couples to stay married purely for financial reasons?
The data really supports a rational choice model. Couples are basically running a risk assessment on their union. The financial cost of commitment acts as a barrier to dissolution. Couples who remain married are expected to have a greater ratio of income relative to needs if they stay together compared to if they divorce.
So the higher the financial penalty of separating, the longer the commitment tends to last.
Precisely. This suggests that couples with more to lose financially, those for whom the divorce penalty is very high, tend to stay married longer, even if the emotional bond might be completely strained. In one sample, the married subgroup was expected to lose almost 0.65 income relative to needs dollars more than the divorced subgroup in the event of separation.
So there's a clear financial benefit to sticking it out.
A very clear benefit. The marriage is economically solvent, even if it is emotionally insolvent.
This just emphasizes that the certainty of the financial outcome post-divorce is a huge strategic factor in the decision-making process for dissolution.
It is the ultimate strategic lever. Policies that increase the certainty of substantial maintenance payments. For example, when payments are explicitly tied to high pre-divorce income gaps, unambiguously lower divorce rates.
It makes divorce too expensive.
And that confirms that couples are rationally factoring in the anticipated financial penalties of separating before making that ultimate decision. The legal framework, therefore, acts as an economic enforcer, maintaining marital commitment based on financial penalties rather than on psychological respect or genuine partnership.
Which brings us full circle back to my friend, preparing for his expensive proposal in Amalfi, expecting to finally lead his family. Our deep dive has really shown why his dream is.
Well, it's built on quicksand.
It is. He spent 2 years establishing an unsustainable performance contract rooted in evaluation and hypergamy.
He fundamentally mistook the currency needed for stability, didn't he? He did. The high value placed on external performance and the financial resources used to buy a woman's attention and acceptance during courtship is just. It's incompatible with earning the respect required for a long-term partnership built on equity and mutual purpose.
He treated the entire courtship as a transaction to win a prize, not as the arduous mutual beginning of a shared building project.
And the resulting marriage is now caught in the cross-currents of history. You have women who are often economically independent but still hold expectations rooted in traditional provider roles, while men are penalized by economic and legal systems that were designed to compensate for traditional home specialization, often regardless of the wife's actual earning potential.
The man who was submissive and performed to win his partner is the last person she will look to for leadership after the wedding.
That dissonance, the failure of the courtship currency to purchase respect, is the instability factor we see playing out across all the modern marriage data.